let's get to a big picture topic if we can here for a moment, Jimmy, and that is non-conference opponents. You and I have sat through a lot of North Texas games at Neyland Stadium when there were better games when there were better games on TV. So I'm torn on this. I'll just be real honest with you. You could change my mind either way. I would like to see, for the fans' sake, Tennessee play quality teams. Mm-hmm. But with a 12-team playoff and you're in the SEC, why? Because if you lose 2 games, you're probably going to be butting right up against the 12 teams anyway. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that you need to play a difficult opponent. And as a matter of fact, it might be most pragmatic just to play patsies. What are your thoughts on that?
When I was thinking about Alabama, so if they had not played Texas, they're undefeated and there's not a question about them getting in. The fact they played Texas put them in a position with the 14 playoff of maybe not making it. They end up getting in. I would like to see now with the SEC, they're playing an 8-game schedule now. I don't know if they're going to stick to that or not. I haven't been able to crack that code as to whether they're going to go from 8 to 9. If you're playing an 8-game conference schedule, I think you ought to go out and play at least one other quality opponent and maybe 2. Now, Florida State actually did it this year. They played LSU and they played Florida. And I know you say, well, Florida wasn't that good this year. But Florida, that is a name opponent. You didn't know they'd be that bad this year. So Florida State went out and scheduled 2 hard ones. They go undefeated and they don't make the playoff. It's hard to predict what the committee would do. Now, personally, I would like to see you play at least 1, maybe 2. And if you're going to play an 8-game conference schedule, I think it's incumbent upon you to at least go out and play 1 really good non-conference opponent. If they go to 9 conference games, I think that might change some people's opinion. But if you're Alabama and Georgia, you really don't worry too much about that. If you're the Tennessees of the world, now that 11-2 a year ago would have got you in the playoffs. But going forward, 11-2, would it get you in? It depends on what everybody else is doing. So I hope that they continue to play good quality, at least 1 or 2 good quality non-conference opponents.
So I am going to go out here and I'm going to convince you, Dave, and I don't know where you're going to stand on this, Jimmy, but I for the record, Dave will tell you I'm not a fan of the 12-team playoff. I think it's going to wreck the regular season, and I think you're going to see teams next year. I told Dave, if my team's in the conference championship game and I know my team's in the playoff, I'd rest all my starters. That you say you get the first round bye, well, resting all your starters in the conference title will be the bye anyway. So I think this whole thing is stupid. I have been very upfront about that, but I will say, I actually think.
By the way, if I can really quickly, we had a chance to visit with Peyton Manning. What did Peyton Manning have to say about that?
They're like, that is total bullshit.
By the way, that's probably what Peyton said the other night when Tua played Sweet Home Alabama on the guitar and he had asked Tua to play Rocky Top. But okay, so I'm actually going to say that I think the 12-team playoff is going to expand. It is going to increase quality non-conference games, because I think the more you see this in basketball, I know it's NCAA tournament 68 teams, but the more you expand the playoff, the more you have leeway to lose games and sell your schedule strength. How often do we see in the NCAA tournament a team with 23 wins that has like the 200 ranked strength of schedule be like, why didn't we get in the tournament? We should have been in. We won 23 games. And you see like a 16 and 14 team have the number 1 strength of schedule. The committee's made it. How can the selection committee make it any more clear that they value non-conference and strength of schedule? And teams still schedule patsies in college basketball in the offseason and complain when they don't get in. Let's look at college football. You're right, Jimmy. Alabama got in as the 4th seed because they played Texas non-conference. But had we had the old system, the BCS, they would have paid for playing a non-conference game. They would have been out of it. And it would have been Michigan and Washington, and Michigan would have been rewarded for pulling it up now, East Carolina, UNLV, and Bowling Green as their non-conference games. And that's what would have got them in the playoff or in the BCS over Alabama choosing to play Texas. But now that you've expanded it to 4 teams, you added just enough leeway for Alabama. I think if you expand it to 8 or 12, I think once you get past the automatic bids, there's 6 automatic bids. So that renders conference championships. I mean, that renders non-conference games irrelevant. You could lose all 4 conference games, and if you win your conference, you're still getting in if you're in the SEC or the Big Ten. But I also think that this committee is going to reward more and more teams that play tough schedules where 9-3 with a couple Power 5 non-conference games will outweigh 11-1.
It's a lot to unpack, Jimmy.
I'm sorry?
That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. Well, I hope they do reward the non-conference schedule. They didn't with Florida State this year, but I hope that they do going forward. And I do agree with the premise that, and that's why I distinguished earlier. If you're Alabama and Georgia, it doesn't really matter. But if you're Tennessee, I think there's a potential to lose a third game more so than it would be for Alabama and Georgia, at least right now. So that's why I think Alabama and Georgia might be more inclined to go out and play tougher non-conference schedule, whereas Tennessee might think, hey, we can't afford another loss. We're going to have 2 in conference. We don't want a third one. So I think with some teams, Caleb, will do what you're saying. They'll continue to go out and schedule good non-conference opponents. But other teams like Tennessee that are more on the borderline might go a different direction.
Hey, Jimmy, I just had something pop into my mind, and that's how stuff ends up on offthehooksports.com
a lot. Thing to...
I might write a column on this. How cool would it be?
You never like it when hookers get ideas.
That's right. Usually it's to steal something, I would imagine. But what if the Big Ten and the SEC got together? Okay. Or the SEC and the Big Ten don't like each other. So the SEC and the Big 12 get together. Or and 2 conferences get together and they say, if we do this together and we both have a difficult non-conference opponent, kind of like they do in basketball a lot, and we match it up strength versus strength. In other words, Vanderbilt's not going to be going to Ohio State. I think there could be something there where you get the best of both worlds, and that's a non-conference opponent that's quality, and you're still getting the respect because they're taking the risk of playing a non-conference quality opponent as well. So I think you would get the respect from the committee. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think the Big Ten did that with the Pac-12 one year before they raided all their teams and stole them all.
They just did it for travel money to go see them.
Yeah, but you did see Ohio State play a Washington or somebody. Michigan would play Oregon or something. You did have that briefly with the Big Ten Pac-12. I like that idea. I think they ought to do that. I think it would be, and maybe it's the ACC. I don't know. I mean, I think the SEC and the ACC played 12 games this past year, and the ACC went 7-5. Now, Wake Forest beating Vanderbilt doesn't move the needle for me, but still the ACC had a better record against the SEC. So one of those conferences, I think it would be good to try to play and try to match them up. As you're suggesting, don't have Alabama go play Boston College. Have Alabama play Clemson or somebody good, or Florida State. Or like LSU played Florida State. I like that. That's a good way to open the season. It also draws some interest. So I do think there's a lot of promise to have the SEC tied up to another conference and improve your non-conference schedule.
You do know the NFL does the model y'all suggested with the SEC Big Ten Challenge. I thought of this, right? The NFL, you have 2 random division games and you play just where that team finished in that division from the previous year.
Yeah, I think subconsciously I kind of stole it from that.
It would be brilliant. Now, of course, y'all said the ACC. The ACC is not going to exist in a few years. And by the way, Florida State is livid with the ACC because you want to know why they're not in the playoff this year, right? The ACC commissioner was the one who nixed the 12-team playoff starting in 2023. He resisted it. They are livid about that.
Interesting.
And so they chose to join the ACC over the SEC, and then they complained about SEC bias. The ACC, you cannot blame the SEC at all for Florida State being out. They extended an invitation to Florida State, and the SEC, Greg Sankey, wanted the 12-team playoff this year.
Interesting.